Loud, brash, shameless, arrogant, unethical, deceitful, manipulative, gaslighting, selfish, attention-seeking people are doing very well in the world right now. They are rewarded in politics, media, finance, most high-paying sectors. And because of social media, even regular folks are being rewarded for these behaviors in all kinds of ways. So we're going to talk about what I think one of the tougher origins is, which is culture. Now, culture can beget narcissism in many ways and can really be sort of intergenerational. In cultures that are highly authoritarian, really patriarchal, very stratified, for example, by things like money, and are dehumanizing and discriminating of and against those who don't hold privilege in that society, perhaps on the basis of gender or race or sexual orientation or social class or religion. These are the cultures that pretty much grow narcissistic folks on a cultural basis. And because it's so intergenerational, the dismissiveness that can be placed against certain members of society by the culture at large, but also the willingness to be permissive about this dismissive, invalidating behavior within a family and to have that behavior enabled, well, that can beget even more narcissists and lots more narcissistic abuse within the family because no one will ever call it out. In some cultures, I'd say in many cultures, it's about gender. It's almost presumed that the male members of a family will have the power, and everyone has to accept it. That emboldens the men in the family, which is often led by a narcissistic patriarch, and the beat goes on. But keep in mind, this is also sometimes a dynamic we observe in mothers of sons who get their power by proxy. The mother has a son has power, the mother gets power, and mom is also a narcissistic abuser. But this only works with enabling and people who are willing to say, well, that's just how it is, or he just wants what's best for you, or he just wants you to be safe. I call BS on that. Anytime humanity, empathy, and respect are not given to everyone, not only does that beget narcissistic behavior within members of that system, it's bad for everyone in the culture. And cultures that have these structures and that grow narcissists are cultures that struggle economically, political, and in terms of social stability. So honestly, if you want a successful culture, address narcissism and you'll be good to go. Now, within a culture, children in a family system may witness people within the culture being treated differently on the basis of whatever characteristics are over or undervalued and are the focus of bias, for example, race or gender. And it creates a sense that some people are perceived as better or more worthy than others. These kinds of ideologies allow the narcissistic people to hold their entitlement, bully and belittle other people. And if this is apparent, some of the children in the family system are going to be shaped by this and carry on the family tradition of bias and bullying. Some children will create more balanced views and move away from the family ideology. But those who kind of grasp onto this kind of ideology can help create another generation of narcissists. The challenge with narcissistic folks that come out of this cultural space is that they can really pull for justifications from the rest of us. They can't help how they grew up. That's just how their culture was. They don't really mean it. It's the culture talking. And you may find yourself making these kinds of excuses. This can happen if you get into an intimate relationship with a narcissist who has this kind of cultural backstory, or you are working with someone who has this backstory. I have witnessed terrible cases of workplace harassment or abuse, and the defense of the narcissistic perpetrator was often based on, oh, that's my culture, oh, that's their culture, we just have different boundaries, that's just how we talk. Screw you. The person has learned to assimilate in other ways. They can also learn how not to be an a-hole and not write that behavior off to culture. It is often the golden children who grow up in these kinds of cultural systems who are the most likely to become narcissistic. They're told that they're great And they often really incur benefit from growing up within an oppressive culture that told them that they can do what they want and don't have to worry about the little people. They may buy into the existing belief systems that do value some human beings over others, or are completely dismissive of some people. That said, vulnerable narcissism is also quite possible in people who may have, for example, been the empowered gender within their culture, but may not have gotten the other benefits of being from that culture. Maybe they moved away from the original culture and lost that societal privilege and ended up feeling victimized and resentful that they can't get their way, and will often then bully those who have less power so they can feel dominant, while they at the same time feel bullied by the new culture. The culturally enabled narcissists get their life force from the enablers who let them get away with it. Within family systems, when this is part of the narcissistic origin, expect no change, especially if they're enabled. And folks like this may sometimes get into trouble at work, especially as we're getting more and more awareness that abuse isn't okay. And then, even in the workplace, they'll say, oh, it's my culture. Tough. Learn the damn rules. And these folks may be genuinely shocked when they're being held to a behavioral standard. But otherwise, their families often just let them get away with abusive bullying behavior with impunity, and many workplaces do as well. And even the family members who do see the behavior clearly, there isn't much they can do other than to just get out, and that's not always easy. For you as an individual, and this is my bias, but whether the origin is more culturally embedded or not, narcissistic behavior is narcissistic behavior. Justifying it on a cultural basis can keep you stuck and continuing to self-blame. And sadly, as long as the narcissistic person really doesn't get it because they think their behavior is actually okay, just like all narcissistic people, the likelihood of change is pretty small. And if they hold on to their dehumanizing or minimizing view of other people, then it's even less likely. And I say all of this as a child of immigrant parents who grew up around nothing but cultural narcissism. These origins, they look and feel the same. There's just more people making excuses for it, which means it can feel worse. And it's so deeply entrenched when you have this cultural origin of narcissism that when I raised it, I was viewed as the problem, not the narcissist. So it's an interesting way to think about how narcissism can come up in a person. Is basically the messaging from the culture is like, it's okay to behave like a horrible, abusive person because you have the right to, because, I don't know, because you're a man or because you have money or something like that. It's never okay. I don't care what your culture is. I think everyone can behave like a decent human being, and this kind of origin is something that leads a lot of people to say, well, maybe they're not really a narcissist. Maybe it's their culture. Sorry if it walks like a duck. Let's talk about whether this could be a reason why narcissistic behavior in the world seems to be getting worse, but maybe there's not more narcissistic people per se. So let's open up this video with a question. Are there more narcissistic people in the world? Or could there be something else going on? Frankly, we aren't sure. I know that anyone these days who's learning about narcissism or who's been through a narcissistic relationship is convinced that now you see narcissism everywhere and that narcissism has to be on the rise, and young people all seem to be more narcissistic than ever. And to many people, it's all this evidence that there's more narcissism. Well, there's various psychological phenomena at play here. There's stuff like something called confirmation bias. So once you see one thing, you start seeing lots of support for that one thing, and you start seeing more of it. You're more attuned, and in general, we're sort of looking for support for our hypothesis, and we find it. There's actually kind of only variable evidence that narcissism is on the rise. Some researchers suggest, yes, it is on the rise, and others, though, have suggested, no, not so much. Lots of the issue here relates to how difficult it is to measure narcissism in any sort of meaningful way. So there's really no great definitive evidence here. And then this idea that young people are more narcissistic now than in my time. Well, I promise you this, your parents and grandparents said that about you. So this is a generational thing. Older folks tend to view younger folks as more selfish. Always have, always will. But I don't disagree, though, with this sense of something is going on out there. But I don't know if narcissism itself or the number of people who are narcissistic are on the rise. I remember a conversation I had with renowned narcissism researcher, Dr. Keith Campbell from the University of Georgia. And he thinks, and I agree with him on this, that grandiose narcissism is kind of holding steady. There's always been grandiose narcissists. But that vulnerable narcissism may be on the rise, and it's being expressed more than ever. And I kind of agree with him on that too. And some of this is that we now understand this subtype of vulnerable narcissism more clearly, and we can see it for what it is. I also think that historically, and now, we have always held a lot of space, tolerance, grace, and enabling for narcissistic people. I don't think we're that different now. It just plays out differently. In prior generations, a cold, remote, invalidating, unempathic, unavailable patriarch or father was normal. People who were in marriages being invalidated and emotionally abused was normal. It wasn't even taken notice of. It just simply was. It's something in research we'd call a cohort effect, like a lot of relationships were like that. Now remember, psychology is a very young field. Frankly, so is psychiatry. So things that once didn't really get acknowledged or addressed, like depression or anxiety, we talk about them now much more openly. We now much more clearly recognize the importance of early childhood experiences. And we talk about how adversity affects people into adulthood and how attachment matters and that trauma is really harmful. And all of this needs to be addressed. There was a time when childhood trauma was just written off as a part of life, and that the so-called cure was to not allow people to talk about it and just force them to just toughen up. I know it doesn't seem that way, but we're actually making a lot of progress in many issues related to mental health and development and well-being. But there's still this vexing narcissism issue. We hold space in our world for narcissistic people in a different way now. We reward them at a societal level. Loud, brash, shameless, arrogant, unethical, deceitful, manipulative, gaslighting, selfish, attention-seeking people are doing very well in the world right now. They are rewarded in politics, media, finance, most high-paying sectors. And because of social media, even regular folks are being rewarded for these behaviors in all kinds of ways. The more unhinged, superficial, vain, cruel, mean-spirited, self-centered content online gets eyes, and all of that turns into money, which turns into power. But I still think there is something else going on here, and it goes back to what Dr. Campbell said about the rise of vulnerable narcissism. That type of narcissism that is characterized by victimhood and grievances and passive aggression and disenchantment and irritability and anger and suspiciousness and this low-grade paranoia. Nothing's ever fair to me. Brooding, entitlement kind of narcissism. Not that charming, grandiose narcissism, but the socially isolated, isolating, always put upon sad sack narcissism that we see in vulnerable narcissism. And side note, if things go the way the vulnerable narcissistic person wants, they will sort of prance about as a grandiose narcissistic person, but they'll still be kind of paranoid about it. Now, I'm old enough, this is why it's good to be on this channel, because I am old enough, that when I was growing up, I only knew what the people around me had. You knew that some kids in school, their families had more money, their families had bigger houses. You saw them on the bus route when the bus would drop the kids off at, in their houses. Their parents drove slightly nicer cars. Maybe they took bigger vacation. I grew up in the 1970s and early 80s when there was a much more substantial middle class here in the United States. So most of us were kind of living around the same space. It was also clear which families were struggling a bit, but most of us were squarely in the middle. And the worst of it would be that we might see. Remember the mean girl who would wear the newest designer jeans, or the mean jock whose mean dad bought him the new car when he turned 16, but that was about it. And you know what? Again, lots of those mean girls and mean jocks peaked in high school, right? And became woefully ordinary afterwards, and once they hit adulthood. Most of the rest of us moved away, or at least did something with our lives. So here's where it gets, I think this to me is the sort of the inflection point. It's social comparison. Social comparison is a powerful thing. We are social creatures. We compare. We look at the friend's nicer lifestyle and we may wonder, what am I doing wrong? Or their higher salary, or their healthier relationship, or that they're in good shape, whatever it may be. We index by looking at others. We always have. It's what our species does. And maybe we'll look at a friend who's not doing as well as us in other ways, and index against that. Psychological health means that we still do that. We're never going to not socially compare. But when we're healthy, we can take a step back, get perspective, and not get lost in a destructive rabbit hole of comparison. For example, we may feel a little down after seeing our friend's fab life, but that doesn't stop us from finding meaning and purpose in our own. So this healthy social comparison is not what happens for narcissistic people. And as we stop to think about what are the reasons that narcissism or narcissistic behavior feels like it's worse, or feels like it's more or extra these days, I really think it comes down to social comparison. I mean, none of us like comparing ourselves unfavorably to someone, but it really gets under the skin of someone who's narcissistic. Think of all these narcissistic traits as switches that, until stuff happens in the narcissistic person's life to turn it on, may kind of lie more quietly. So the narcissistic person is difficult and annoying, but when the thing happens that turns on that insecurity switch, you cannot turn it off. For most narcissistic people, that's an ego injury or some form of shaming. And that, most often, for a narcissistic person, may come through social comparison. Now, in the last 20 years, the social comparison game changed monumentally. Once upon a time, like I said, growing up, I wouldn't know what a random person was doing in Indiana. But now, I can see every damn single detail of their lives. I can see every single detail of everyone's lives if I chose to follow them on social media. And since many, many people are sharing more socially performative details of their lives, great vacations, interesting experiences, great accomplishments, new things they have acquired, a happy relationship, looking attractive, I'm at the beach. Social comparison has leveled up to a whole new game. And in general, people with narcissistic traits are not coping well with this. I do believe that there were always vulnerable narcissistic folks in the world, those brooding, angry folks. And they were alongside them, grandiose ones, malignant ones, self-righteous ones. There have been lots of narcissistic folks in the world throughout history. But most of them were in what we can call closed systems, in families, marriages, workplaces, maybe in their community. The people in those closed spaces had to suffer with it. But now the barrage of imagery that pings the narcissistic people's entitlement may be driving what we see in the world. More and more angry narcissistic folks demanding more and more attention and doing more and more outlandish stuff to get it, or getting more and more aggrieved and rageful that they're not getting it. Their lives are not as good as other people. And then throw in there that stuff costs more money now, especially stuff that we need, rent and real estate, and that wages haven't kept pace. And people are seeing other people posting about their fabulous lives online. You can see where this goes, and it is not pretty, and I think it's really lit the rocket of narcissism. This genie does not go back into the bottle, and narcissistic behavior per se is never going to be against the law, unless it really crosses an identifiable line, and in most cases it does not. Being an asshole is not illegal. And while I am actually not convinced that there are more narcissistic people than ever, I do think we value narcissistic behavior more than ever. My guess is that that number of narcissistic folks is probably staying relatively steady-ish. It appears that people with these personality styles, though, are behaving more badly than ever. And that may be what we're seeing, and we can see more of it. That means for folks who are afraid of being hurt again, or want to be sure that you don't get ensnared in another narcissistic relationship again, discernment is everything. We also have a video on empathic discernment you could check out. You can be empathic and compassionate, but also be discerning. Think of a lion at a zoo. It's beautiful to look at. You may even feel sad that this beautiful animal is locked in a cage or in an exhibit, and maybe even want to save it or rescue it in your heart. But if you tried to go in there and let that lion out of its cage, you would be flayed alive. It's a similar principle. You can understand how sad and difficult it could be for someone to have a narcissistic personality, to always feel insecure, but you can't save them. That's their responsibility. And if you get too close or don't witness it realistically, you will get hurt. And the world has become a place where narcissistic traits are not only more celebrated than ever, but is also making them more visible and more noxious. Which means that you need to understand it, and also understand that not you, not me, not anyone is going to be the exception. Get too close and you will get hurt, especially nowadays. And frankly, everyone would do well with not going down that social comparison rabbit hole. It's not good for any of us. But when you think about it, again, just to bring this point home, it's not likely that there's more narcissistic people. It's probably a relatively steady number who are really getting much more activated and enraged in a way they didn't once before. Because that social comparison trigger for them, which is a very tender trigger for narcissistic folks, is resulting in more and more outbursts of anger and rage at the world. That's likely a lot of what we're seeing. And because we're also living in a world where those traits are rewarded, sort of the more unhinged the behavior, the more people are looking at it. And people can turn that into money. That it's emboldening this personality in a style the way it never has been emboldened. But for people saying, well, does that mean everyone's like this? Hell no. There's lots of wonderful, healthy, well-regulated, empathic, warm, compassionate people out there. They just may not be drawing the same kind of attention. And it's why we need to be very, very, very discerning, careful, and move slowly when we first meet someone. That's shiny stuff, charm, charisma, attention-seeking can be really compelling for a minute. But then you have to ask yourself, what makes this sustainable? And another sort of great life hack when it comes to understanding narcissism, pay attention to how the narcissistic person reacts to social comparison. For some of us, we might socially compare to someone. We all do it to some degree and say, ooh, I feel kind of insecure. Like, how is she in that such great shape? Or how is her kitchen so clean? And then we let it go. But when you see someone get really escalated in the face of social comparison, or you see their mood very quickly shift at that point, pay attention. I can promise you this, whatever their journey is, it ain't going to be healthy for a long-term relationship. So probably not more narcissists, but definitely this problem of social comparison at this unbelievably universal level has taken a problem and lit a match under it. This idea of forced kindness. Honestly, this is just one more way that enablers attempt to get you to enable. So this is what sort of spurred this video on for me. I had recently observed a rather toxic email chain between colleagues and a professional group go down. I was sort of a voyeur on it. I'm always so curious about human nature, and especially toxic human nature, that sometimes I follow the back and forth on various listservs and email chains. I don't participate in this nonsense, but I watch it. Basically, someone on this email chain had said something that was pretty gaslighty, okay, and had minimized the experience of many other people on this rather large group of people who were on this email chain. Many people were angry, which I thought was good because it's never okay to gaslight, but then a few other people came out with, can't we just be kind? I know this guy and I know what he wrote and he's actually kind. I'm sure he didn't mean it. Damn, people, in this email, these were psychologists, which goes back to my point where how important A, therapists can be narcissistic, but B, why it's so important that we have therapists that are actually trained in narcissistic abuse. But as a therapist, I am sure Mr. Can't we be kind and Ms. Can't you just be kind would have no problem gaslighting you in therapy because they had no problem gaslighting 50 people on an email chain. I saw in a minute with this interchange, and I recognized that I had to figure something out, okay? I do believe in kindness. I believe in getting kindness out in the world. What I am not down with, and I don't want you to be down with either, is to always find a kind way to call narcissists out on their BS. Part of the reason narcissists and other toxic people say such outlandish stuff is because A, they don't care that they hurt other people, B, they never face consequences, and C, enablers are always walking on eggshells trying to find a nice way to tell them that what they said was not nice. Here you have a person who is already entitled and lacks empathy and is arrogant, and then you're going to tell them in a nice way to stop saying not nice things and cutting them a break because they didn't know. Remember, in this particular case, the people I'm talking about were professionals. We are living in perilous and polarized times. Many people are afraid of saying the wrong thing, and others don't care if they say the wrong thing. And then you have the enabling squadron out there making sure we are nice to toxic people who spout venom because maybe they didn't know and we need to teach them. Personally, I'm tired of being a teacher. Me, you, all of us. I am sick and tired of having to be a teacher to all of these narcissists. While I understand that some people may step in it, make the mistake, say the wrong thing, because they really were clueless, most people who say invalidating things are repeat offenders. So back to my original point. I believe in kindness. It's the lack of it. That's exactly why we are in the messes we are in this world. But I also recognized after doing a deeper dive in that one particular email interchange that now I recognize that I don't know that I'm just a believer in kindness. I think what I'm a believer in is informed kindness. First, I'm going to tell you I never believe in deliberate cruelty, even if I'm facing down a narcissist. Disengagement, walking away, brief responses, breathing, not getting in the mud with them. And I got to tell you, I'm owning it. I don't always get this right. Those are better approaches. And even when I have all the goods to slam dunk them, I don't. I disengage and make a mental note in the future to avoid or minimize my interactions with them and make sure I document them if I need them for professional reasons. This childhood playground approach of just be nice, no matter how ghastly a person behaves, is not okay. And in my book qualifies as major enabling. So yeah, I'm a fan of what I call informed kindness. Most people out there want their kumbaya moment and say, see, we were just kind, and we can go back to not having to address any of this ugliness. And then, no surprise, the toxic person does it again. And the kindness cult says, well, let's just be kind again. Maybe this time they'll get it right. Informed kindness is a way of recognizing the importance and power of kindness, but to not give it out in a way that's so enabling. It's the let's just be kind no matter what thinking that often means that toxic people's initial toxic behavior never gets real consequences, and so they just keep doing it. Consequences actually can work with narcissistic and toxic people because they care what other people think. And because they are so shame-filled, yeah, they don't like those consequences, but these need to be real consequences, real accountability, especially early on. When we do it that way, you can actually result in change, or they walk away from the group because they're like, oh, these people are on to me. Informed kindness means you pay attention to the person's conduct and track record, and then and only then do you do the kind thing, versus if this is a repeat toxic offender. You would instead disengage, give real consequences if you're empowered to do so, and give the group of people who want to play at this ridiculous blind kindness thing, and then determine how much longer you want to work or be affiliated with them in any deep way. Between you and me, that one group of people on that email chain, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing this anymore. We've all seen this happen in families, in workplaces, and we see the toxic person just keep doing it. And sometimes really be skilled enough to play the big foolish, well, golly, I sure didn't mean to hurt anyone. I'm sorry if people were hurt by what I said, which is, of course, more gaslighting. They'll rarely be sorry they said it. They're just sorry people got hurt by it. They may even throw in a slippery apology. I never intended for my words to hurt anyone. I just need to learn to be more aware, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? They probably didn't intend for their words to hurt anyone. They just don't think when they open their mouths. So they just talk without thinking. And how many times do you want to endure that carelessness before you wonder whether or not it was intentional? And does it really matter if a person keeps doing it and never stops? Kindness as a blind quality doesn't work in a world that is increasingly filling up with narcissists and their enablers. A more circumspect approach offered by informed kindness allows you to engage in a kind manner when it is earned and warranted, rather than one-size-fits-all moonbeams and rainbows and unicorns. Too often, many people say, why is the world becoming like this, Dr. Ramani? Why is it I work with so many narcissists? Why are there so many toxic bosses? Why are people behaving like this in the grocery store and on the highway and everywhere else? It's exactly this. Because you'll see this even on social media and message boards, and I said on an email chain, when somebody actually tries to call a person out for their behavior, they're immediately met with, well, let's try a little bit of kindness. And once again, the toxic person gets away with it. That's why this concept of informed kindness, to really pay attention to the track record here and really wonder if you just want everything to be an eraser to let's pretend nothing bad is happening here, is really the best approach. I think kindness can be informed by circumspection and wisdom. And this isn't summer camp. We're grown-ups and we need to be realistic. Otherwise, the kinds of toxic abuse that seems to be becoming more and more commonplace is going to take such a wholesale effect on all of our health and all of our institutions that I'm not always sure on how we're going to come back from this. So my morning doom scrolling means reading the news. And more tellingly than the news are the comment sections. The news is bad enough, but where I really learn what people in narcissistic relationships are up against as they heal is definitely the comment sections, because it's here that ordinary folks, since most of us are not journalists or close to journalists who aren't edited, make their opinions, unfettered opinions, known. And one comment I recently read in particular caught my interest, because it sort of encapsulated to me why so many survivors feel so shut down, despite the encouragement from some people to talk it out. I forget that there may be many more invalidating than validating voices out there. The article itself that I was reading was talking about things, books, articles, whatever, that people should read to learn about mental health. Like they were like sort of first-person stories about mental health. Ironically, almost all of the stories they highlighted were about the types of mental health stories that feel more comfortable or accessible. People who had a diagnosed mental illness themselves, such as depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, maybe addiction, things like that were on the list. Ultimately, what it got at is that these were people who were telling, for example, their story of depression from the point of view of the person who has depression, the person who has schizophrenia. It's more of like a disease model telling of mental health. And I had read some of the books and things on the list. They were powerful and good books. But one thing that was completely missing from the list was books by or about people who had experienced things like domestic abuse or violence, interpersonal trauma by people they knew, and trusted people such as family, or emotional abuse or intergenerational abuse, and there sure as hell weren't any on narcissistic abuse. None of that was represented on this list. We don't like stories about mental health that implicate the behaviors of other people. And we definitely don't like it when that abuse doesn't meet some threshold that somehow society deems should be met. Physical abuse, severe enough sexual abuse. It has to be bad enough for the general audience to be willing to clock it as trauma. What we don't want to account for is that the accumulative daily betrayals, invalidations, criticism, subjugation, and denial of reality that a person endures in any kind of abusive or narcissistic relationship, whether in childhood or adulthood, is harmful. It's betrayal trauma. It's a relational trauma. And as such, as a field in mental health and psychology and in the mainstream, don't want to recognize any of this. If a person thinks their parent was toxic or their spouse is emotionally abusive, we are more likely to criticize the person who is being emotionally abused for being so dismissive or not understanding that there are 2 points of view in a relationship or that everyone has different ways of expressing anger than we are to clock this emotionally abusive pattern as harmful, really harmful, and having very real mental health impacts. We want tidy mental illness stories. So back to the comment section. The comment that led me to stop reading and put the damn device down and feed the cat was when one person's comment was they were recommending a really great book about a woman's experience with complex trauma. And then another commenter replied to that comment and said, "Oh no, everyone I know who reads these books about complex trauma just become navel-gazing complainers who just want to talk about their trauma, or that they have had to disengage from family members, or want to talk about what they are still trying to manage." And then that commenter goes on to say that everything just melts into that person, the other person who has complex trauma self-absorption. I have no doubt that many of you have someone in your life who has said something like this to you, or at least had a sort of sneery, eye-rolling vibe around you. These are the very people who don't want your relationship to be just superficial, like your friendship with them. But when you do share something vulnerable with them, then you are navel-gazing, self-absorbed, therapy-speaking fools. And it may be that some folks really only want superficial conversations. My guess is that the commenter on that article may prefer maybe that the conversation only be about her. But when I saw that comment, after I got past the anger, I really felt sad. Who knows what her problem is? But she represented what I know many other people have shared with me. You can share about yourself, but don't share so much that I'm uncomfortable. And make sure you get along with your family and then talk about pleasant stuff and only talk about stuff I want. It's no wonder that relationships can feel fraught for survivors of narcissistic relationships. Because especially if you are still in the narcissistic relationship or just getting out of it, you are confused. Relationships are already messed up places. Places that only work if you give up on yourself, be what the other person wants, shape yourself to their reality and what they want. Just figuring out how to be in new relationships can be really challenging for people who are healing. You sometimes find yourself sort of going back and forth between oversharing and undersharing, between opening up and finding you can't stop, to feeling numb and silenced. And knowing that there are people out there who sit in sneering judgment that you are selfishly navel-gazing because you're sharing about yourself, and that the ruminating voices sometimes just need to come out of you, and that most of you are just looking for a safe place to land or share, that comment was the height of selfishness. And yet, when survivors encounter someone who takes that kind of stance, like that commenter, oh God, again, you're going to go talk about going no contact with your mother or about your husband's gaslighting, sarcasm optional. Once again, you have entered a relationship where you are told, please don't burden me with your stuff. I guess I'm just sharing with you what you have already, I am sure, experienced many times. The world can feel like a whole lot of damned if you do, damned if you don't, when you are in one of these relationships. The challenge is knowing that this is not everyone, but sifting through it all and finding the safe spaces is not easy, and it can feel impossible and demoralizing. Other people's discomfort, contempt, and disdain for your pain, for your situation, and for the things that you have had to endure in these relationships doesn't mean that your experience isn't important. It's because that other person lacks empathy or capacity. And once again, we are back at the fundamental truth when it comes to these relationships and how the world regards people who are stuck in something that they never asked for. You got to keep remembering, it's not you. Finding new friends and new social supports is never easy. But paying attention to this kind of dismissiveness and learning with whom you can show up as your whole self can transform this experience from cutting off parts of yourself to valuing yourself enough to recognize that some people just aren't worthy of getting to see your whole you. And that is their loss. Thanks again.